Today we're going to talk about something kind of important, and that is how Django works. These are going to be concepts that we're going to visit over and over again this semester. And so your understanding how the process works for Django, very important, and we'll be visiting these concepts quite often this semester. Django uses a framework called model view template. You've seen the model part. We're moving now into the view part, and later in the semester we'll be doing the template part. I want you to know that there are other frameworks for websites. There is one called Model View Controller, which is incredibly powerful and is also very, very popular. To be honest, these aren't that different, but you should be aware that there are different frameworks for how web pages should operate. As you've seen, the model in the models.py file, that's the schema for the project. That's the structure of the data. That's the column names as well as their types. The model makes the web pages dynamic. The idea of using these frameworks is to create dynamic web pages, so you're not just seeing the same static information all the time. If the database updates, so does the page, for example. Now in Django, db.sqlite 3, that is the actual database container for your project. You will see that in your root folder in your project. You'll see that file. You don't really need to do much with it. You can look at the data using the DB browser utility that we saw earlier, but that's really all the interactions we're going to have with it. We're moving now into views, and a view is really the business logic of an application. So typically a view is a Python function or method, and that's what we're going to be writing. If you're writing in Python in Django, you're writing a view, basically. The view determines what data you see, but it is not the data itself. That's the model. So as an example, if you're checking out, let's say at Amazon.com, and it shows you your what you've ordered and how many items you've ordered and what their prices are and all that stuff. What you were seeing on the page is not the view, but the view was what determined what was going to be on that page, the logic of it, that the items were in stock, for example, what the ship dates were, how much shipping you're going to pay, those types of things. The template is the actual presentation of the data. That is what you see on the screen, typically in the form of an HTML file. In Django, HTML files are the templates. We're going to get there later in the semester, but this does kind of lay out for you the general framework. There's another important file that we will be referencing a lot this semester, and that is the urls.py file. You'll see this both in the main project in the root folder, but you will also see it in the added applications in each of your projects, and you'll see this as well. I call this the traffic cop, because when you type in an address, for example, www.myserver.com, the traffic cop is what handles that incoming address and directs it to the appropriate Python view. So here's a representation of it so you can get an idea. If the request comes in as www.myserver.com, the urls.py file intercepts that request, and it determines which view then is called or initiated. Notice that because there is nothing after the slash, the pattern is going to be a simple empty string. Remember, Django only looks at the pattern that occurs after the name of the server. So if the server is www.myserver.com / there is nothing after that address, so therefore the pattern that would match there would be simply an empty string. That is mapped to, let's say, go home, which is a Python function. Django initiates the go home function, which is in the views.py file, and the view function in this case the go home function, may ask for data. This is where the models comes in, and so if it asks for data, the database will then send the data back to the view. Now, Django uses models.py to create the schema so that it knows the field names and the field types and those types of things. The data, again, are not in models.py. The data are in the db.sqlite 3 file. It's an important distinction, but the data are actually not in models.py. So this graphically isn't exactly correct because it is not requesting the data from models.py. Technically, it's requesting it from the db.sqlite string, but I'm trying to stay within the whole models view template framework. After the controller, the views.py file rather, which is of course the view, has requested the data, the go home method then returns an HTTP response. Remember, there are two parts to any web request. You send out and type an address. That's the request. That's an HTTP request. The server intercepts the request and then has to send back a response. What the views.py file is doing is determining which Python function is called, but each Python function must return an HTTP response. So when you initiate go home, the last thing in that method has to be the returning of some kind of an HTTP response. Now in practice, if you look over here, the view is going to return a rendered HTML page. When we start getting into the templates area in the next module, you'll see how we use templates, more HTML type framework files. And what typically the view will return is a combined HTML template with the data from the database, and the result will be, for example, what you see on Amazon.com. In the simple examples we're going to be doing for the most part in this module, we're just going to return an HTTP string, HTTP response string, which is much simpler and it's much a little easier to understand, so that until we get to templates, you'll see that I use that practice quite a bit. So that's the kind of the round trip idea of how a process is handled, a request and a response is handled.